Yeah.
Tell me the stories of Jesus. I love to hear. Things I would ask him to tell me.
Thank you. Thank you, BIC Children's Choir. I know we're having some mic issues this morning. Can you guys hear me? Can everyone hear me? Wonderful, wonderful. That was a beautiful song. I think I know which choir I want my daughter, Journey, to join first in life. I have the example right here. That was wonderful. Thank you for inspiring me and my family. It is really, really nice to be back in Bangkok. We've been here for a few weeks. We are visiting now that we've been away for several years, and it's really, really great to be with our BIC family. We really feel like we're with family every time we come to Bangkok, and especially when we come to BIC. So thank you so much for making us feel welcome. I'd like to also thank Brother Ian for his wonderful children's sermonette. I think that's the first time I've seen a live lighter in an Adventist church. Would you agree? Yeah. Very, very wonderful. Today I'm going to talk about something that I think we are all rich in, that we all have a lot of. It's something that plagues our lives, or at least we think plagues our lives, and it's problems. It's obstacles. I had my own little obstacle late yesterday. I hadn't had time. I was working on deadline, and I don't travel with a suit anymore when I travel. So I was like, what am I gonna preach in tomorrow? I better go get something. But sunset was arriving, and luckily my friend and neighbor Jess Tura was generous enough to lend me this jacket. So if it's fitting well, you have Jess Tura to thank. Just don't ask me to button it because yeah, that could be bad. Anyway, so obstacles, and the obstacle is the way. I'm going to get into this and what I mean by this. Let's move to the next slide. We all have problems. Sometimes we think babies don't have problems, but look at this. Can't speak, can't walk, no teeth, no job, dirty diaper, God bless. Woo! I know all about this, having 3 years now of experience. You that are seasoned parents are laughing at me right now, but everyone has problems in this life, from the youngest to the eldest. Let's move on to the next slide. We can see here, when we get a little bit older, other problems come in. Relationship problems, career problems, school, other issues. And they stress us out. They make us feel like we're up against something that we can't deal with. But in the Christian life, we have some hope. And the hope is that the obstacle is the way. Let's go to the next slide, and we can see a little bit about what the Bible has to talk about tackling challenges, about tackling problems. James 1, verse 2 and 3. One of the most beautiful texts in the Bible when it comes to dealing with challenges in our lives. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. So what's James saying here, or what's the author of James saying here? It's that when we have problems in this life, the way to see these problems, from the smallest to the greatest, is that they are providing some kind of an opportunity for our growth. Now, admittedly, it's very hard to see that opportunity in the moment, but God is helping to strengthen us through these problems, through these challenges. And I want us to remember this principle of biblical truth as we look at the stories. And it's going to be story time today, as we look at the stories that we're going to study today. How do problems help to make us stronger? And how does that help the obstacle to become the way? How does God give us obstacles to grow and become the way? All right, let's move on. So, the first principle that we're going to look at today is perspective. Let's keep going here with the slides. And Thomas Edison, a great American inventor, and he's often credited with creating the light bulb. That's disputed historically, but we often think of him as creating this. He was a wonderful inventor. He created a lot of different things, a lot of different patents. But in his life, he didn't always just have good news. Now, I want to talk about one of Edison's biggest obstacles that he came across. This kind of an obstacle would have crushed an ordinary human being. But as you can see, or as you will see, Edison was a whole different kind of person. Let's move to the next slide here. Before we get to the obstacle, he would say things like, I have not failed, I have just found 10,000 ways that would not work. Now, the average person doesn't think like that, right? The average person doesn't meet failure by saying, you know what, I'm going to try again, I'm going to try again and again and again, and finally God will help me succeed. But that's how we should think, right? When we come across problems, it should just be a blessing from God and a challenge to work even harder, right? Let's move to the next. Okay, now the quality on this picture with our light is not the greatest, but what it is showing you is a massive fire. Now this took place on December 10, 1914, and it started about 5:30 p.m. Now this fire attacked about half of Edison's buildings at the time. About half of his building. There was an explosion, they caught fire, and it was devastating. This was in New Jersey. And they say 8 to 10 fire departments came to try to put out the fire. 8 to 10 fire departments. No luck. The fire just tore through these buildings. And he wasn't even insured properly for this damage. So you could imagine his life's work. Guess how old Edison was when this happened? He was 67 years old when this happened to his life's work. Fire just destroying his buildings. How do you think Edison responded to this? He arrived while the fire was burning, and the New York Times quoted him as saying, when they ran a story on this, he told people that were close by, he said, "I may be 67, but I'm going to start work again tomorrow. I am not letting this stop me." He didn't just say that. He called his son over. His son was quite young at the time. He said, you know, enjoy the show and go call your mother and all her friends because you're never going to see anything like this again. That was his attitude. When something that could devastate you, especially that age, when life hit in a bad way, he said, I'm going to keep on going. He took a trial and he let it make him steadfast. The damage that was incurred by this fire, in today's dollars would be $23 million. Did a little math this morning. That's 690 million baht that burned up that fateful night. And yet Edison is saying, I will start again tomorrow. About 4 years later, with some help from his good friend, Henry Ford, who loaned him some money, Edison was able to rebuild. He was able to charge forward. He was able to take this obstacle and make it the way. And he was able to make, in that year, 4 years later, $230 million in today's terms. That would be about 7 billion baht, right? From being devastated to this kind of a victory because of the power of perspective. Brothers and sisters, in our Christian lives, business life aside, all of us face devastation, often more frequently than we wish. I know I've had my times when tears have come to my eyes and I don't see the way forward. But God is giving us these challenges and He's saying, I can get you through this. If you're struggling with something today, if you feel like your life is burning up in front of your eyes today, I don't blame you at all because I frequently feel that way. But you know what? God can take this trial and make you steadfast. Let's keep going. Next slide, please. The next principle. So first we have perspective. How do we see our problems? How do we see what God is doing in our lives and the strength that He gives us to go through? The next is action. Now, we're going to go to the next slide and we're going to look at a guy called Reuben Hurricane Carter. Now, those of you that are boxing fans, I'm not much of a boxing fan myself. I think it's too violent. But this guy in the 1960s was one of the top boxers in the world. Let's go to the next slide. As you can see there in the top left, he's posing with Muhammad Ali. He was a world champion boxer. I mean, this guy was virtually unstoppable. Everybody said this guy is the next great boxer. All right, really inspirational athlete, wonderful attitude, and he was at the top of his game in the 1960s. Let's go to the next slide. Unfortunately, around that time, at the top of his game, at the top of his career, he was accused of a triple homicide. Not only was he accused, he was tried and he was convicted for this triple homicide. And he was given 3 lifetime sentences in prison for this. 3 lifetime sentences. Now they say that Carter, he reported to prison dressed in a suit with a nice watch. And he said, I'm going to have the right attitude about my prison sentence. He went through the next 19 years not taking favors from anyone. He read history, philosophy, and law books for that entire time. 2 trials later, all that work and the right perspective, not giving up, not becoming corrupted, not saying, woe is me, but deciding that even though something very unfair happened to me, I will not let this get me down. Carter walked free from prison when it was found that he was tried unjustly. He walked free. Let's go to the next slide. This is Carter with Nelson Mandela in 2000. Brothers and sisters, how would we react in the place of someone like Carter? What is God trying to teach us in the unfair experiences in our lives? Every Christian comes across unfair situations. Perhaps you're experiencing them in work right now with Sabbath issues, or you're being pressured to perhaps drink with your colleagues, or maybe you're in school and you are getting peer pressured into things that you would rather not do. What can we learn from someone like Carter that is put in an unfair situation? Do we give up? Do we let world sort of roll over us? Or do we say, God has given me strength for a time like this? I was just in Japan a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to some newly baptized members of the church there. As you know, Japan is a notoriously difficult place for the Adventist church and for Christian churches in general. It's very, very hard to baptize people there and for people to remain faithful. And as I talked to these newly baptized people, I was so inspired by their determination, even though it's so hard in Japan to be a Christian, to stay the course, to be a faithful Christian and walk with the Lord. Drinking with your boss is often very expected. I talked to a member who, or someone that used to be a member that was struggling with that in terms of her path coming back to the church. But there were shining examples there of people that said, I will not let this unfair challenge get me down. Wherever we are in the world, whether it's in Japan or here or in the U.S. or wherever we may find ourselves, God is calling us not just to have the right perspective about problems, not just to take action like Carter did, where he didn't lie down, but he kept on reading, he kept on studying, he kept not giving up. But God asks us to do one more thing. Let's go to the next slide. He asks us to trust. I'm going to share a personal story. These first 2 were illustrations from business and from athletics. But this is a personal story, and it happened to a pillar of the Adventist church in Sweden a few years back. And it really shows me how the text in James 1, verse 2 and 3 of trials making us steadfast has its ultimate expression. Let's go to the next slide. This is my hometown. This is where I was born, Stockholm, Sweden. And it's also where a very, very dynamic and powerful Adventist church is situated. Let's go to the next slide. I can show you there. So this is where the Adventist Union office is. Perhaps some of you have been here. On the left is the Union office. On the right there, you can maybe see in the doorway, the words are Adventkyrka, which means Adventist church. And this church is just pivotal in the Adventist denomination in Sweden. We only have about 3,000 members, so basically everybody knows everybody, right? And there was an older lady. Her name was Rudy, and she was in her 90s by this time. Now, Rudy was very special to our hearts because she had basically helped raise my dad. From the time my dad was very young, my dad was born during World War II, so you can imagine how much older Rudy was, right? She had been close to the family. She'd never married. Rudy had never married, so she basically had found her family in my grandfather's family, in my dad's family. And she had stayed in touch over the years. When my parents decided to become missionaries, they first went to Africa, and then they came to Asia. Rudy would stay in contact with them. And then when we would go home, after my sister and I were born, we would often go visit Rudy and say hi and how's it going. She was just a wonderful gem of a person. And she was just known for her generous spirit. She was known for encouraging both young and old. She was the kind of person that you're always happy to see at church, that maybe church is not even the same church unless you see that smiling face of Rudy at that Adventist right there. I wish I had a picture of her, but I looked through my stuff. I didn't have it digitally. Now, Rudy was reaching the end of her life in her 90s. And I remember we were more and more concerned for Rudy. We were wondering how things would finally come to a close. And towards the end of her life, she got very sick. And of course, everyone was very concerned. Church members were praying. Her best friend, her name was Irian, was praying. And Rudy was admitted to hospital. It's the ultimate trial, right? When you're facing the end of life. But we have this hope, right, as Christian Seventh-day Adventists. She was reaching the end of her life, and she was in bed in the hospital, and her friend Irian was there, and they were talking. They were talking about the love of God. They were talking about the beauty of life. They were talking about what comes next. A friend of hers from the Stockholm church, he came over, he brought his guitar, and they sang about heaven. They sang about what comes next. Rudy was kind of a grandmother figure to me. Rudy was so sick. Irian, her friend, was so worried that she was also getting older, that she was admitted to hospital as well because she was so worried for Rudy. And as she was saying goodbye, because she was being taken to her own hospital room, she said, "Rudy, I'll see you in the morning. I'll see you later." And Rudy said, "Irian, yes, I hope I'll see you in the morning, but if I don't, we'll see each other in heaven." That was the last time they saw each other. We can learn powerful things about how to deal with the trials of life from our older friends, from our older Christian friends that have dealt with the trials of life and have allowed them to make us steadfast. Let's go to the next slide here. This text here comforts countless people around the world. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Friends, sometimes we have the right perspective on problems. Sometimes we take the right actions. We're not lazy, we carry on. But sometimes life is life. And this is a fallen world, and we can only trust. And we can only have faith in the God whose rod and staff comforts us. But this faith and this trust that we can have is the ultimate way in every obstacle. Because if you do not fear death, what should you fear in this life, right? Amen? Can I hear an amen to that? Amen. If we do not fear death, what could we possibly fear in this life? God gives us perspective. God gives us hope. God gives us action. But He tells us to trust. He tells us to trust. At tearful moments like this, when you talk about death and the ultimate challenge that brings about, I'm reminded of some happier words that Jeb Bush, the president of the son of the former president and the brother of the other former president, he said at his mother's death, which was not so long ago, at the funeral. And he said, "If my mother were here consulting me about what I should say at this funeral, she would say, 'Keep it short and don't get weepy.'" I've tried to keep things short, but I've certainly not kept it from being weepy. But I just want to encourage you guys. Death will happen to all of us. Problems will happen to all of us. But we can take encouragement from the people that have gone before us. Rudy was well known in church for being so thoughtful. She had a little bit more money than most because she was a physical therapist and she was single. So she would lend money to church members. I remember she told me, she said, Bjorn, when you get married, you borrow money from me, okay? Please borrow money from me. I want to help you out. I never took her up on that. But she was the kind of person that would do that. She thought the pastor should be better dressed, so she went to the store and bought him a nice jacket. Can you imagine that kind of lady? She was the kind of person that taught us to trust, that taught us to have the right perspective on problems. So, brothers and sisters, let's go to the last slide here. Let's remember, you may be sitting today and wondering, what in the world are you supposed to do? You are saying happy Sabbath, you're putting a smile on your face, but deep inside you know that you're going through a major challenge. It might be financial, it might be the death of a family member, it may be your personal health. You may be struggling to find a job, you might be bullied in school. But God is saying to count all your trials of various kinds joy, and to meet them with a confidence, because you know that the testing of your faith will provide steadfastness, not just in your life, but in the example that you can be when others see you dealing with trials in a triumphant way. May it be our prayer to see our trials and grow in steadfastness. Amen.